The spotlight continues on Minnesota over immigration and fraud concerns. California looks at a possible tax per mile for drivers, and Illinois' DEI program continues to be scrutinized. This is the Center Square Daily for Thursday, February 12th, 2026. I'm your host, Greg Bishop, and thank you for joining us daily. Minnesota remains the epicenter of immigration enforcement, but also fraud concerns. At thecentersquare.com, you'll find the latest story where immigration enforcement surged to end in Minnesota, according to border czar Tom Homan. Now, 5 weeks ago, 2,000 federal agents were sent, but crediting local cooperation, Homan, he says Operation Metro Surge will end next week. The move comes after last week, Homan saying that they're starting a drawdown of federal officers in Minnesota. Homan was brought in by the Trump administration after 2 individuals in Minnesota were shot and killed by federal officials amid immigration enforcement actions. Now, this morning in a U.S. Senate committee, Minnesota Attorney General Keith Ellison, he characterized the surge from the Trump administration as retribution.
This surge is all about what Donald Trump said it was all about. In a true social post on January 13th, he wrote, retribution and reckoning was coming to Minnesota.
Now, Homan saying this morning that he is getting more cooperation from local officials, especially when it comes to illegal immigrants who are criminal defendants in jails or in prisons being released. And Homan citing that cooperation as a reason why this operation in Minnesota could be drawn down. Now, in that same hearing where Ellison was in Washington, D.C., State Representative from Minnesota, Harry Niska, he explained why he thinks the tensions have poured out into the streets of Minnesota.
No, the public statements of Minneapolis officials have been that Minneapolis police will not assist in enforcing immigration. Perhaps they'll assist if there's some state crime that's alleged, but if ICE were to call in your scenario and say we need to pick somebody up for violating immigration law, the Minneapolis public statements have been that they won't. And the example we saw just this last week of someone who was arrested with 50 pounds, an illegal immigrant arrested with 50 pounds of meth, and January 8th was allowed to go free and had to be taken by ICE last week.
So despite Homan making the comments this morning about the rationale for drawing down federal officials in Minnesota, you can still hear some of those concerns from Minnesota representatives testifying to Congress. But again, immigration enforcement, that's not the only thing that Minnesota is getting so much attention for. There's also the ongoing questions about social services fraud. A separate U.S. Senate hearing this morning focused on that, with Louisiana U.S. Senator Bill Cassidy laying out how he's worried this isn't just in Minnesota, but it's across the country.
This is more than a Minnesota problem. And let's be clear, it isn't a California, New York, Illinois, or Colorado problem. It is an American problem. Can I see that chart? Some states have done well, and some states shamefully. And this is what we need to look at. Now, it's not enough to be angry. We got to have action. We got to have accountability. We've got to stop the fraud. We've got to protect the taxpayers. We've got to allocate the resources where the resources need to be allocated for those families who actually have the need.
And you can see just some of the highlights from that map, the child care overpayment rates for various states, ranging from 0 all the way up to, looked like Washington had a double-digit percentage error rates. Obviously, the child care system is just one component of social services fraud that a lot of people are concerned about. You have housing fraud, home services, you have a variety of other social safety nets, SNAP, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, and more. But Colorado U.S. Senator John Hickenlooper, he agreed that there's a crisis with the child care program.
And it's clear that we have a child care crisis, and that crisis needs addressing. The crisis is certainly not helped by actions to freeze child care funding for entire states, such as Colorado, and what's happening there. The unlawful freezing of $10 billion in funding for child care and other social services leaves kids and providers as the collateral damage for often what is no more than political retribution.
And again, the Trump administration freezing $10 billion in child care assistance money to a variety of states that the Trump administration worries there could be fraudulent activity happening. But back to Minnesota, in that separate U.S. Senate hearing, Ellison, the AG from Minnesota, there to testify about the ongoing questions of immigration enforcement, but he also talked about some of the fraud that's brought his state so much attention.
The government has said the purpose of the surge is to fight fraud in government programs. Well, of course, I hate fraud, and my office and I are already fighting it. We've convicted 300 people of Medicaid fraudsters in the last 7 years. The government did not surge, however, forensic accountants to Minnesota.
Now, the taxpayer cost in Minnesota estimated to be in the billions, and that's just one state and a fraction of the size of a state like California. So while members of Congress continue to evaluate immigration enforcement efforts and details about possible fraud in social services, let's now head over to the West Coast to see what's happening to taxpayers in the Golden State. Madeline Shannon, California State House reporter for the Center Square, joins us. Madeline, you have a story looking at a bill that would impose or possibly look to impose a per-mile tax on California drivers. We've seen this type of idea pop up before, but it really hasn't advanced. What are you looking at in the Golden State?
So Assembly Bill 1421 seeks to establish a committee to study the impacts and feasibility of replacing the state's gas tax with a per-mile road user charge. And legislators are looking to replace the gas tax with something else like the road user charge because of declining gas tax revenues coming to the state in the last few years, largely due to the fact that there are a lot more electric vehicle drivers in California than there used to be. Between 2011 and 2025, more than 2.5 million electric vehicles were sold in California, and more than 400,000 of those were sold in 2025 alone.
Now, if you look at some of the information you gathered for your story from the California Department of Tax and Fee Administration, it highlights just that exact fact. Almost 14 million gallons in fiscal year 21 and 22 sold, while just a few years later, that's down to 13.3 million gallons sold. So clearly there's a drastic drop there in the amount of gallons being sold. But California obviously has some of the highest gas taxes, Maddie. Does that play into this equation at all?
A little bit. I know that the gas tax has gone up a little bit every year between 51 cents and 59 cents. And even though that does result in more gas tax revenues, lawmakers know that that might not be a sustainable solution long term. So they're looking to other things like this per mile road user charge. I know that some organizations have voiced support for something like that if it applies to all drivers equally, not just electric vehicle car drivers. But then others say that it's an invasive tax if it were to be invoked or imposed and impractical to enforce.
Now, you're there at the State House grounds in California doing your reporting. Does this thing look like it could advance? And what would the implication be for the taxpayer? Would it just be a study to look into it, or would they actually be advancing this if this bill makes it across the finish line?
Well, this bill really would just establish a committee to study the impacts of imposing a per mile road user charge. This bill does not actually impose the charge itself. This would just be the first step in looking at how that could impact the state and the feasibility of rolling it out and if it is indeed practical.
Now, Maddie, we've seen this pop up, and I believe Oregon had a pilot program of sorts looking into this. Illinois toyed with it for a decade plus, the idea of possibly bringing this about or even doing a study on it. It always gets substantial pushback from a variety of different, individuals, those concerned about the cost, but also those concerned about privacy. How would they go about addressing those concerns? Because part of this has to be you're tracking somebody by the miles they drive. Are they going to be looking at the tachometer, or are they going to have a device in their vehicle tracking where they're going?
Well, that remains to be seen. I think that if this bill passes and a committee is established to study how the state would impose this per mile road user charge, that is something they would look at. I know that sometimes insurance companies that insure drivers and provide car insurance, per mile car insurance, will send a policyholder a tracker that they put in their vehicle, and the company would be able to track that driver's mileage and then charge them accordingly. That's the only thing I can think of for how the state might actually keep track appropriately of the driver's miles. But this bill doesn't really say how that would be enforced, and the mechanisms that the state would go to actually impose this per mile road charge, if indeed we see a bill next year that actually tries to introduce this per mile road charge.
Again, California having the highest gas taxes in the country. 51 cents a gallon back in 2021, but now that's up at 59 cents a gallon in 2025. And that's just the state tax. That's not the federal gas tax. That's on top of that. When you add that on, that goes up even more. So we'll be watching this closely, Maddie, as obviously a lot of states have toyed with this idea, but nothing's ever really truly advanced statewide. Will California be the true bellwether on that issue? We'll be watching. And while drivers look at that prospect, let's talk about California taxpayers covering $90 million for Planned Parenthood. Maddie, just a few days ago, we featured some of the debate from the Senate floor on this very issue. And Governor Gavin Newsom signing that bill into law yesterday. That was pretty fast.
It was a very fast move for one budget bill, but lawmakers really wanted to get this $90 million to Planned Parenthood quickly. Of course, that had its critics, particularly Assemblymember David Tonkipa, the Republican Assembly member from Fresno, said on the Assembly floor earlier this week that he is concerned about the state giving so much of its general fund revenue to one politically connected organization. And considering the fact that so many rural hospitals across the state are closing right now, and several others are in danger of closing, and even more have closed their labor and maternity wards, so women who want to give birth in their county can't now, he would like to see that money go towards helping rural hospitals up and down the state that are in danger of closing.
Also, you had others raising concerns about the lack of oversight, and even one Republican we featured talking about this is a $90 million check to a politically connected group, one particular politically connected group. So clearly there's a little bit of a divide in the California State House on that issue. Maddie, thank you so much for taking time with us from sunny California. It looks incredible out there as I'm stuck here in central Illinois and it's still chilly, but I'll tell you, 40 degrees feels like summer here. But those palm trees behind you look pretty enticing. Greatly appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you for having me, Greg.
Now let's dive into the Center Square's investigative team's latest about a little-known commission in Illinois that comes with a hefty taxpayer cost.
Illinois diversity commissioners are paid tens of thousands more than other state boards, but aren't required to work full-time, allowing them to run a digital media company, freelance as a human resource contractor, teach and consult for universities, direct a play, and run a business hosting Dungeons and Dragons games at bars.
Well, one of the commission's most important charges is to increase the number of local businesses that are certified as being either owned by someone who's a racial minority, a woman, someone who's disabled. Those numbers have plummeted in recent months, actually over the course of about a year and a half, from a high that was about 5,400 down to about 2,800 most recently.
The new goal is 30% of the total eligible contract money, which in a recent year totaled more than $33 billion. The agency is led by 7 commissioners who have a staff of more than 30 people. The agency's annual budget is about $7 million. The 7 commissioners meet less frequently than some of their counterparts elsewhere in state government. They take no votes of consequence to the public and earn about $150,000 per year. The average Illinois state salary is between $54,000 and $80,000, so the commissioners make 2 to 3 times as much as the typical worker. The last time they took official action on something was in June 2023 when they approved minor revisions to their bylaws. State Representative Adam Niemerg said the state's Legislative Audit Commission needs to review the Diversity Commission's work and that he will personally question representatives from the Diversity Commission when they report to a House Appropriation Committee of which he is a member.
So yeah, lawmakers have said that they're going to look into the issue, and what's going to happen next kind of remains to be seen.
More to come on that story from investigators with the Center Square. Well, from my studios in Central Illinois, I'm Greg Bishop. Join us Friday for more stories impacting you, the taxpayer, from around the country, only with the Center Square Daily.